Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Regamer video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. I decided to put two videos out today simply because there is so much tech news and, well, the topics are rather different from one another, so I figured it's just better to separate them into two distinct videos. With this video, we're going to start out with Xbox next generation news. So there are, of course, a lot of expectations regarding the next generation Xbox. The rumour has it anyway that the top end SKU in the Xbox family will be more powerful than the PlayStation 5, but obviously Microsoft are yet to formally comment exactly what they're targeting for the next generation system, and all we have is a lot of speculation and some rumours. But there is actually an interesting job listing from Ninja Theory. Ninja Theory are one of the studios that Microsoft have recently acquired. There are multiple jobs that the studio are currently hiring for, but the one that interests me anyway is the call for a technical artist, look development. This is actually located in Cambridge, England. So, kind of my neck of the woods, I guess. And there are a whole bunch of requirements for the job. You will need to be highly self-directed for the role, lend an insight into streamlining the pipelines and improving other team members' assets and their workflows as well as their techniques. All the typical stuff for jobs. Good knowledge of other areas of CG pipeline, C++ programming experience, interest in procedural workflows, and perhaps most crucial of all, familiarity with light transport algorithms and an interest in real-time ray tracing. We're going to further discuss PlayStation 5 stuff in just a moment, including Sony doubling down on the system having ray tracing, but in my personal opinion anyway, I expect at E3, which is coming up real fast now, Microsoft will also confirm that the next generation Xbox will have ray tracing as well. There's a couple of reasons. One, the leaks we've heard thus far regarding both Xbox SKUs, both have listed ray tracing as one of the features that they are sporting. Secondly, though, it would just be kind of weird for the PlayStation to have it and then not Microsoft to follow suit, particularly in light of Microsoft pushing DXR. I know I've said this a couple of times now, I might sound a little bit like a broken record, but Microsoft have made it abundantly clear multiple times that Windows is no longer just for the desktop and Xbox is considered like almost an ecosystem. So for Microsoft, Windows and gaming and Xbox, they're all just different platforms from one another. I don't think that Microsoft are going to put all of this time, all of this research into real-time ray tracing and then be like, yeah, it's actually only for PC. While this job description is not confirmation that the next generation Xbox is going to feature ray tracing, we all know that Ninja Theory will be creating games for the next generation Xbox. In fact, there's a lot of rumours on what Microsoft Studios are currently working on. So my personal opinion anyway is the most likely the teams are currently experimenting with real-time ray tracing. And at least in my opinion, I'm very curious to see exactly what these consoles are going to be capable of. And this brings us to Sony, because there have been a few very curious developments from Sony regarding the next generation PlayStation. So the PS5 had some specifications formally confirmed by Mark Cerny. We learn that it has 8-core Zen 2 CPUs, although the clock frequency was not given. We know that it has a Navi-based GPU, but once again, performance targets were not provided. We know that it's got some type of fast SSD, but what type of read and write speeds and those kind of details were once again not provided, as well as memory bandwidth, quantity of memory. You get the picture. In other words, there was enough to tantalize, but there was not enough to satiate your appetite. And the reason behind most of this is because events are now starting to pop up around the world by Sony to not only inform investors, but also as critically, actually more critically, to actually inform games studios. And development kits now are starting to be sent out far and wide to multiple AAA developers as well. So as you can imagine, studio heads were starting to talk. To that end, there's a really interesting couple of developments. One is a Sony investor conference. By the way, this is also an article. You can find it, as you can probably imagine, linked in the video description. So the presentation was for investors, and it utilized Marvel's Spider-Man as well as several slides. We'll go into the slides in a moment, but the demo started out with the PlayStation 4 Pro. And this was actually captured by the Wall Street Journal's Takashi Mochizuki. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And the demo consisted, in the first part anyway, of Spider-Man and utilizing the fast travel to warp Spider-Man around the map. So the first thing they used was the PlayStation 4 Pro. And it took just over 8 seconds to warp Spider-Man from one location and park him. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, and park him somewhere else. Then Sony did what you would expect them to do. They utilised this new PlayStation 5, although they, of course, are referring to it purely as next generation. The loading was finished in less than a second, 0.83 seconds to be precise, which is about 10 times faster than the previous generation system. Before I do an analysis on that, let's continue a little further. Though in this next test, what they did is had Spider-Man zipping around New York, but they increased the speed of his travel. After a while, the limitation of the PlayStation 4 Pro was pretty obvious. Basically, the system could just not keep up with the speed of the game engine, and so you had things that just were popping in, and it just was clear that the console was struggling. Then they did exactly the same thing with the PS5 hardware, for lack of any other name, and frankly I don't think Sony are going to call it anything other than the PlayStation 5. And basically it just went around lightning fast. So travel times were drastically quicker with the PS5, and this was a demo basically of what is possible with the PS5 hardware compared to that of the PS4 or previous generations. So let's get into a couple of takeaways before we get into the more technical stuff. So this means that loading times for games are going to be drastically minimized. Sony have said that they want to pretty much make loading a thing of the past. It should also mean that games should be much more seamless in their world. You should see a lot less pop-in with textures and other assets. And furthermore, imagine a game that you can time travel backwards and forwards with no loading at all. It would just seamlessly transition around you, and the game world could also be much larger as well. There's a reason that, for example, Mass Effect elevators take a long time. It's to mask loading screens, and this is not a new technique. Games have been doing that for some time. Even another method is the whole walking and talking thing, where your character is slowly moving down a corridor talking on a radio. It's once again to mask loading. So those things should change game design quite substantially. I wouldn't be surprised if the next generation Xbox also sports this, and it also brings up some questions of what's going to happen with PC. It may mean that SSDs become a requirement pretty quickly, which, well, given the price of SSDs has started to go down quite considerably, that may not be such a big deal, although it's very possible that SATA-based SSDs simply would not be able to keep up, and you would need a NVMe-based drive that obviously would not be slowed down by the SATA interface. And it's just going to be really curious what happens with the next generation and how games in, let's say, 2 or 3 years are going to change in terms of their design. But we also have a couple of other things. So there is a slide that Sony also provided. This is titled Next Gen, obviously in reference to the next generation console. And they have doubled down on an all-new CPU and GPU. There's an SSD, backwards compatibility. There is ray tracing, 8K. I highly doubt 8K is going to be a native output, because it would require quite literally 4 times the pixel output of 4K, and I just don't see the PlayStation 5 doing that. It would just be too much of a strain on the GPU. I think that they're going to output natively at 4K, and then it's going to upscale. There's going to be disk support, so obviously that's confirmation that we will see a drive in there. There's 3D audio. So these are all things that Sony have told us previously, and they acknowledge that they have not given a date, there's no pricing, there's no games confirmed, user experience, which is obviously like the GUI, and also country rollout. So for example, will the system launch first in Canada and the United States, and then maybe Japan be later, and then Europe later on, or is it going to be a worldwide launch, or what? And now to finish off this particular PlayStation section, I suggest that you go to your local supermarket, buy all of the salt that they have, come back, and then we can begin. There has been a supposed leak of some of the development kit details for the PlayStation 5, and some of this does make some level of sense because it's not totally out of the realms of possibility, but there are a couple of things, particularly with the memory, which is kind of interesting. So first things first, let's begin with the APU. The system is allegedly using a monolithic die. It's measuring 22.4 mm by 14.1 mm, so this comes to about 316 mm squared. To put that into some level of context, the PlayStation 4, which was manufactured on a 28nm process, where we're guessing the PS5 is being manufactured on 7nm, although that is not confirmed by any stretch of the imagination. The PS4 original, manufactured on 28nm, that measured 19 by 18.3 mm, so around 350 mm squared. On screen right now you can see a die shot comparison of the original PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One as well, not the X, the original Xbox One. The long-standing rumour is that we have 8 Zen 2 cores which are clocked at 3.2 GHz, Sony have of course confirmed some of that, and an Arve-based GPU which is clocked at 1800 MHz and outputs around 12 to 13 T-flops of performance. Unfortunately, because we do not know any, and I mean any, other chips that are on the socket itself, it's very difficult for us to do any kind of meaningful measurement. So for example, we don't know how much space the 3D audio chip takes up. For all we know, it's a completely separate component on the PCB. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So the leaker also claims there are 16 Samsung K4ZA F32 5BM-HC18 in, quote, a clamshell configuration. If you're scratching your head and wondering what the heck, a Samsung K, I'm not going to read all of that again. It is actually referencing Samsung's GDDR6 memory. Now, the module, the model number appears to be referencing a module that would be 2 GB in capacity. And this is for a development kit, so this would mean that we have 32 GB of memory and a memory bus width of 512-bit. Furthermore, the brow razor though is the HC18 at the end, which points to 18 Gbps modules, and these are currently not listed on Samsung's website. They've only got the 16 Gbps. So we're looking at over 1 terabyte, 1.1 terabytes per second of memory bandwidth, which is just absolutely astronomical. There are also an additional 3 Samsung memory modules which are located on the board as well. Each of these is 2 GB of memory. So 2 of them are apparently for usage as a cache for the NAND, which is allegedly 1 terabyte, get into that in just a second. And there's a third chip, which is for operating system use, which is meaning the OS, if it is only 2 terabytes, is actually really small. It's smaller than the PS4 OS, actually. The PS4 OS could take 3.5 gigabytes of memory, although there was flexible memory on the PS4, which is outside the scope of this video to explain, but I've done extensive articles of it on the past, so I'll link them in the video description if you're interested. So that would be really interesting, and once again, 4 gigabytes of DDR4 would be used for caching of the SSD. And apparently, as for the SSD, we are using a PS5016-E16 controller from Phison. And the specifications of this controller, you can actually get them online and they're readily available. It was shown at CES 2019. It is using a PCIe Generation 4, 8 channels of 32 CEs, NAND interface up to 8000 MT support, 16 up to DDR4 interface of 1600 MB per second, 3D TLC and QLC NAND flash support, and designed with Phison's 4th generation LDPC engine. Or if you just want to know what this actually means in reality, there was a benchmark that was released for this controller, although obviously it's a controller, not the specific NAND itself. But it was running with a read speed of over 4 gigabytes per second and a write speed of 4.2 gigabytes per second, which is... We have had in the past a few other leaks concerning the PlayStation 5, and a user by the name of Shame Payne actually released what he claims to be the specifications of the PlayStation 5. According to him, it has either 24 or 20 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, which is running at up to 880 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, and also 4 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, which is reserved for the OS, and there is 2 terabytes of hard disk space. Clearly, there are some changes here, so it's possible, therefore, that this is for a different variant of the development kit, or it's possible that specifications that are being listed here are closer to the retail console, whereas the other specifications are, well, quite simply closer to the development kit. So, if you're looking at 24 gigabytes of memory, that would indicate that you have 12 memory modules with a 384-bit memory bus, which is what you would get if you've got 12 chips. You are looking at roughly the figure of memory bandwidth that's being listed here, although it is slightly out. It's 864 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, not 880. But we do have some reason to believe that this is possibly true, because there is a leak that also emerged on Pastebin. The user in question here claims that the retail consoles will have 24 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, plus an additional 4 gigabytes of memory, which is DDR4 for the operating system. But then, the development kits have 32 gigabytes of memory. So that would mean, of course, 16 memory modules, which is exactly what was described earlier on. And the 24 gigabytes of memory would be only 12 memory modules, once again exactly what was described earlier on. With any luck in the world, we do get a lot more information of what Sony are planning during E3, as well as Microsoft as well. I think this year, both E3 and Computex are going to be extraordinary events, so hopefully you will subscribe to the channel so that we can do analysis together and kind of talk about this stuff. Also, let me know down below what games you are hoping to be announced at E3 and what you're hoping for in terms of exclusives from both Sony and Microsoft for the next generation systems. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.